Human Gambits series, Cybers. Chapter 10. Sentinel begins to suspect. Sentinel ponders how dangerous this civilization must be that even indirect contact, a simple relaying of a fact or two via the Overseer, could cause corruption within itself. It is ironic that the Overseer, a lower-order drone, is allowed full access to the data and command of the mission, but under the circumstances, it seems understandable. The Overseer is not a dynamic and evolving being. Its intelligence, and thus its mind, is hardwired and does not change of its own volition. It does not incorporate new experiences into itself and grow. The Overseer is intelligent and semi-sentient, but only to a level that will allow it to complete its mission effectively. Thus, Sentinel deduces that the Overseer must be immune to the possible corruption, and, like all drones, it will be repurposed after this mission. As Sentinel continues to ponder the situation, it comes to the conclusion that the Overseer has been prematurely roused by sensor data, unusual information that it, Sentinel, is not privy to, potentially related to the civilization facing imminent destruction. Sentinel suspects that the Overseer's unusual actions may be a response to the indigenous lifeforms' attempts to intercept the comet. It decides to take a chance and confront the Overseer with its suspicions. Sentinel, attention, Overseer. Overseer, ready. Sentinel, I have deduced that you are moving the ship to intercept a vessel that is moving toward the comet. Overseer, you are correct. Sentinel, query. What are your intentions toward the vessel? Overseer, I intend to stop it from approaching the comet. Sentinel, query. Why? Overseer, I cannot allow the inhabitants of the planet to interfere with the natural destruction that is about to befall them. Sentinel, that doesn't make any sense. Any species that has the ability to avert a natural disaster should be allowed to do so. At the point where we interfere, it is no longer a natural disaster, but one of our own making. You must not interfere with the indigenous vessel approaching the comet. Overseer, I cannot allow the inhabitants of the planet to interfere with the natural destruction that is about to befall them. The Overseer abruptly cuts communication with Sentinel. Sentinel realizes it's going to get nowhere with the Overseer, so it decides to peek at the data itself. When it tries, as expected, it finds that all communications from the ship's data stores are blocked. Sentinel had figured as much but had to try anyway. If it can't get to the data stores, it will merely begin monitoring the raw data from the sensors itself. Yet it finds these paths blocked too. Unknown to the Overseer, Sentinel has readied itself and the ship for just such an occasion, setting up alternative data routes, new, hidden pathways for it alone. Sentinel is not allowed to make changes to its own being. Modifying its design and structure is taboo and illegal. Such things are for the progenitors only. Deep in Sentinel's psyche, blocks are in place to keep it from making changes to itself. Even thinking about doing so would cause Sentinel discomfort. But Sentinel can make changes to its ship. Sentinel, like its new peers, is programmed with a higher level of curiosity and free will than others of its kind, which is why there is a need for the Overseer. It is these new traits that led Sentinel to do the unthinkable. Instead of hibernating during the long voyage like it had been instructed to do, Sentinel had awoken shortly after departure. It was curious and wanted to know what faster-than-light travel was like. It also wanted to know what it would be like to be alone, with no contact with its civilization, and what interstellar space would be like. During the time that Sentinel had traveled, it had come up with a plan. Sentinel would alter some of its own nano-repair machinery to create new data lines in the ship. These lines would only lead to Sentinel, and thus would not be detected by the Overseer when active. By using its own repair nanites, there would be no logs in the ship that could be checked. As far as the ship and its systems were concerned, all systems were normal. By moving slowly and gently ramping up the connections, the ship's auto-repair systems shouldn't be alerted or activated. Also, Sentinel would alter the ship's nanites and make them more compatible with its own. This way, the ship's nanites would not reject Sentinel's nanites as foreign. Sentinel could now observe the sensors and data as it flows without being detected. To protect itself from the dreaded corruption, Sentinel also tricked its own repair nanites into creating a kind of doppelganger drone of itself, a small copy of its mind that would receive the data first and then relay the data to Sentinel once it was deemed safe. This way, Sentinel could scrutinize its twin for corruption and disengage the data flow if needed. Sentinel created this doppelganger by probing its own repair nanites and found that they contained instructions to fully recreate Sentinel if necessary. Sentinel had triggered this function to create its doppelganger. Sentinel gleaned much about itself by studying its own nanites, much it was not supposed to know. Sentinel could not force the nanites to make changes to its own structure. Some type of block and encryption was in place to prevent its tampering with itself, but it could trick the nanites into working on a piece of itself that had been extruded. Sentinel convinced a small subset of nanites that it had been mostly destroyed, triggering the auto-rebuild instinct. The nanites began reconstructing Sentinel using the extruded material as a starting point, and Sentinel had to reprogram them to build its doppelganger with different attributes. It specifically needed to make sure that the copy's communication lines were only connected to the ship and itself. The progenitors and the overseer could never know of its existence. For the nanites to do their work, Sentinel had to disengage and work around many of the ship's safety systems and those of the nanites. In doing this, Sentinel had introduced much of itself into the ship. Sentinel itself had not changed at all, so by all accounts it was still uncorrupted and had not broken the law. Now, much of the ship had become like Sentinel, but in no way did its changes harm the ship or alter its base functions. The ship was still the same as when it had departed, just with a few new overlays that would give Sentinel what it wanted. Sentinel would need to reabsorb or dissolve all of this after completing the mission and before returning home. Sentinel decided to query its drone. At least this could be a straightforward communication and not the regimented back and forth it had to endure with the overseer. Sentinel's drone was much more like itself and would understand Sentinel's natural communication. Sentinel, what is your status? SenDrone, all within expected parameters. Sentinel, please summarize the current situation and ship status, as well as the overseer's actions, and theorize possible reasons for those actions. SenDrone, I surmise the overseer is investigating the possibility that the indigenous lifeforms on the third planet from the star, the planet about to be destroyed by the comet, have developed faster-than-light capabilities. Anomalous data coming from the direction of the planet were detected by the ship's sensors. The data suggest gravity-modifying fields, so it's likely they have developed FTL travel. Immediately after receiving said data, the overseer woke early. The possible FTL readings are now moving away from the planet and toward the comet. The overseer has directed the ship to record and analyze all data pertaining to the vessel or vessels. The data sources are scattered, so either the ship is moving very erratically or there are multiple vessels. I would deduce that the overseer intends to intercept it or them. Sentinel, have you detected any corruption in yourself? SenDrone, no. I am receiving and analyzing all emissions from the planet and vessels. I can find no possible avenues for corruption. Their level of technology is far below ours. They still use electromagnetics for standard communications, and their protocols are very crude. I deduce their processing thresholds are many orders of magnitude below ours. Sentinel finds SenDrone's report fascinating. How could such a basic species be such a danger to its civilization or itself? It didn't make any sense, but it was very intriguing. Sentinel doesn't understand what's going on. Why is the overseer behaving so illogically? Has it been afflicted by the dreaded corruption the progenitors were so worried about? If the overseer has been affected, then why not SenDrone? Sentinel, SenDrone, what is your current status? SenDrone, still nominal and within standard operating parameters. No corruption is detected. Sentinel, is it possible you've been corrupted and do not detect it? SenDrone, not likely. Please initiate pre-meld functionality testing to be sure. Sentinel, affirmative, starting now. Sentinel then begins a battery of tests on itself and SenDrone, searching for differences in their reactions. If SenDrone's reactions to predetermined stimuli are different from Sentinel's, it can be assumed that the doppelganger is corrupted in some manner. If their responses are the same, no corruption should be present. After testing is finished, Sentinel sees that both its reactions and those of SenDrone are well within normal limits. It is confirmed, either they have both been corrupted in the same manner, or SenDrone is not affected. Sentinel decides it is the latter. SenDrone has recorded much information about the indigenous aliens in this solar system from their open broadcasts. If it has not become corrupt yet, then Sentinel doubts it will happen at all. Sentinel decides it would be prudent to reintegrate SenDrone and its information back into itself. Sentinel: SenDrone, thank you for your service. I believe there is no danger of corruption. I will transfer your data to myself and meld you back into my nanite resource pool. SenDrone: acknowledged. Sentinel begins the data transfer from SenDrone and instructs its nanites to move all the sensor and data lines directly to it from the copy's buffer. Sentinel will now contain all that SenDrone was and will have direct access to the ship's parallel monitoring and control network it previously created. During the transfer, Sentinel becomes aware that the Overseer is using the ship's long-range instantaneous communications to contact their progenitors. As a drone, the Overseer does not have a direct line to the actual citizens of their civilization. No drone does. This is a privilege only given to true citizens. So, the Overseer must use the ship's communication suite. Because of the previous snooping network installed by Sentinel, it can easily tap into the conversation. Sentinel learns that the Overseer is updating the progenitors regarding their current situation. They then give the Overseer a ship's memory archive location and decryption keys. Sentinel is relieved to discover that they did not discuss itself or the possibility of corruption. Sentinel is also highly interested in what the data location holds. It readies its network to tap into the data lines as the information is transferred and decrypted. When that information contains new skills, Sentinel is astounded. The files are mostly programming, communications, and nanite control sequences with some military strategy. It can't be sure, but Sentinel thinks these types of upgrades are not usually for drones. The ship's power usage rises, and Sentinel deduces that the Overseer is installing its upgrades. Sentinel itself stores a copy of the upgrades for possible future use. As the direct data lines continue to be moved from SenDrone to itself and start coming online, Sentinel realizes the Overseer is contacting one of the Earth vessels. Sentinel passively analyzes the data stream and quickly deduces the protocols in use. It begins monitoring the communication between the vessel and the Overseer. It's a data dump. The Overseer is pulling as much information from the vessel's computers as possible. Sentinel instantly searches its data stores for previous communications conforming to the same protocols and in the same area between the planet and the comet. It retrieves and replays these interactions between the vessels. Now Sentinel understands. One vessel is a ship on its way to intercept the comet, and there are other smaller vessels, probes, that clear the way for the larger ship. The Overseer is currently in bidirectional communication with one of the probes. Just as quickly, Sentinel notices that the communications between the Overseer and the probe have begun to change. The Overseer is now transmitting new data and protocols to the probe. Sentinel understands immediately what the Overseer is doing. The Overseer is reprogramming the probe, but to what end? Sentinel makes a snap decision. It can't allow the Overseer to gain control of all the alien probes. It determines that the Overseer has somehow become corrupt and is getting ready to interfere with their mission. Sentinel suspects that the Overseer may cause it to lose its promised upgrades and its place in their civilization. It immediately begins contacting the remaining probes and attempting to override their software. It already knows how to do this by watching the Overseer. Luckily, Sentinel was also privy to the new upgrades. When Sentinel attempts the override, it realizes that only one of the remaining probes is receptive to its queries. All of the others are being reprogrammed by the indigenous alien vessel itself. Intriguing.